So lots of people are coming in. As everyone is coming in, I would just like to say a huge welcome. Welcome to the BSA and this amazing Friends lecture. My name is Rebecca Sweetman, and I am the director of this research institution. For those unfamiliar with us, we are a UK-based charity whose object is to conduct, facilitate, and promote research in Greece in all periods and across all arts, humanities, and social science disciplines. Now, we do this from this main base in Athens, where I currently am, and a smaller satellite research centre at Knossos in Crete, and an office in London where Flora is based, and I'm sure many of you have met Flora. We've had a really busy summer already, with fieldwork taking place in Keros, Knossos, East Attica, and Tumbasiron, and all of those places actually represent the wide breadth of material that we work on and the wide chronologies that we work on. And while we've been in the field, colleagues at Knossos have had the regular cultural programme, and a highlight of which was the Earth, Fire and Water event that they had with the Thraxino pottery people. We're really looking forward to a busy year ahead, and our events calendar is out and packed full of a wide variety of events to suit all. Now, you're looking at a screenshot of our website, which we urge you to visit to explore what we do, and also to consider signing up to our mailing list to receive information about our activities, including future events like this, and indeed, perhaps to become one of our supporters. And I think Flora is putting up details already in the chat, so you can figure out how to do that. So everyone, what I'd like to do is, before I hand over to Nigel Spencer, who is chair of the Friends Committee, I'd like to welcome you all again here. I think most people are in at this point, and it's brilliant to see so many people here. But before I hand over to Nigel, I'd like to just run through a few protocols that I hope will help the event run smoothly. Other than the speaker and host, all microphones are off by default. Throughout the talk, there are two features that are available. There's a chat feature that looks like a single speech bubble that allows you to type text, which can be read by other participants, as well as the lecturer and the host. You can use this actually if you experience any kind of issue, and my co-host, Flora Michalaki, will try to assist. Otherwise, we will ignore the comments in chat, but feel free to comment to each other during the talk. There is a Q&A feature too, which you can see during the talk. It looks like two speech bubbles, one on top of each other. And in that, you can type questions which are for the speaker only. So only you, the speaker, and the host can see these. Now, after the lecture finishes, Nigel will read out a selection of questions received, and our speaker will very kindly respond. You should see a small window in the top right of your screen. If that gets in your way, you can mouse over it and either move it around your screen, or you can click on the bars above it to make it smaller. So I hope that's all clear. And the Q&A protocol will be repeated at the end of the lecture. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Nigel Spencer, who's chair of the Friends. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for the introduction, and lovely to see everyone's comments already on the webinar chat. So lovely to see we've got a global audience very much as well, whether it's Alaska or people who remember David teaching, or from Kenya, for example. So it's lovely to have a nice global audience with us. So yeah, just briefly, my name's Nigel Spencer. I was a student at the school. We were just discussing before we started, way back when, 1989 to 91, I was there, and I was doing my research all around Lesbos. So some of David's work, which we'll come on to later, and some of his, when you've seen his biography as well that we've shared, it sort of links to Winifred Lamb and some of the work there. But so what's the Friends? So I chair the Friends. That's a committee that supports Rebecca and the school. We organise regular lectures, such as this one. Sometimes we organise lectures with a twist. So in a few weeks' time in October, we're actually doing a lecture with some Greek wine tasting in London as well. So we do sort of some innovative things like that, and also some trips as well. And actually, we've got one of our committee members currently in in Greece. I won't reveal where in case it's a secret, but organising, perhaps thinking about the next trip as well. So we try and be active and support and raise money for the school, which we then work with Rebecca to make sure it goes towards the research and the other needs of the school as well. If I could just say as well, obviously we're a charity, as Rebecca said. If you do feel able to make a donation, I think thank you, Flora. Flora's shared in the chat there the link where if you would like to make a donation for today, we're very grateful to David and all the people who give lectures who very generously give their time for this. But as I say, we're a charity. It helps all the students, it helps the research, and it helps, you know, the school still exists, that we have these types of donations. So that would be very kind of you if you're able to consider that. And there's the link in the chat, as I said. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to eat into your time, David. But you'll have seen David's bio there on the notice about the lecture. So David, as you know, has held many senior university roles, a very esteemed academic colleague. Also in the area of heritage and cultural property as well. So a lot of work there, and in museums, and all of those things I've just said range from, you know, the Fitzwilliam in Cambridge to Newcastle to the British School at Rome, and a wealth of different institutions in the UK as well. Many publications as well. And I know, David, we're very grateful that you're able to present your research here, which I know you've done in collaboration with colleagues, which you were going to, I think, mention as well at the beginning. But it's such a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for the lecture. And yeah, perhaps without further ado, David, I'll put myself on mute and hand over to yourself to tell us all about Cleon's victory at Sphacteria and the Temple of Athena Nike on the Athenian Acropolis. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nigel and Rebecca, for your welcome. I'm going to just start with some thanks. This is part of a much larger research project. I'm just finishing a book with my two friends, Peter Schultz and Mike Lippmann, and we hope to be tidying the final manuscript up fairly soon, and more details about that I'm sure will be forthcoming. John Goodinson has very kindly done some reconstructions for us, and we're sharing those today. So I hope that will help you visualize this most amazing temple. The Athenian victory at Sphacteria in 425 was a turning point in the Archidamian War. Spartans had been captured on the field of battle and been brought back to Athens. The myth of never surrender, as Paul Cartledge put it, had been shattered. Thucydides noted the outcome. Altogether, 440 Spartan hoplites had crossed over to Sphacteria, and of these, 300, less 8, were taken alive to Athens, the rest having been killed. About 120 of the prisoners were Spartiates. Well, pressure could now be applied on the Spartans to stop their annual invasions of Attica that had forced people to find refuge behind the walls of the city. As a result of the overcrowded conditions, the Athenians had been devastated by the plague that had carried off their leader Pericles. Apollo had been appeased by the purification of the island of Delos in 426. But these weren't the only challenges faced during the Archidamian War. Cities paying their tribute had been restless against Athens. In 428, Mytilene had revolted with the support of Sparta. And it was at this point that the Athenian demagogue Cleon gave his speech that provided no mercy to those who challenged Athens' authority. They, as Thucydides put it, they decided to put to death not only those now in their hands, but also the entire adult population of Mytilene, and to make slaves of the women and children. The victory at Sphacteria was a key turning point in Athens' experience of the war. Cleon had claimed that within 20 days he would either bring the Spartans back to Athens alive or he would kill them on the spot. And this boast was achieved, and on his return, Cleon was feted by the city. 2 specific honours were awarded: sitesis, the right to public dining, and proedria, the right to sit in the front row of the theatre. In Aristophanes' Knights, performed at the Lanaya in early 424, both honours are given prominence in the taunts against Cleon. Cleon, who's not done a thing. He was, of course, perceived as having snatched the victory from Demosthenes. For example, in Knights, the honourand is denounced for running into the Prytaneion with an empty stomach and then running out again with a full one. Again, in Knights, Paphlagon, Cleon, attacked the sausage seller. "I'll destroy you. I swear it by the proedria that Pylos won for me." Of course, this humour is all the more pointed if it's realised that Cleon would be sitting in the front row, absorbing this string of insults. And it may be that this is the very context for the passing of the Prytaneion decree that provided the criteria for individuals to receive an honour such as sitesis. Although the decree is not firmly dated, the current discussion places it in the mid-420s. Significantly, the letter cutter also prepared the inscription for the first priestess of Athena Nike. The victory of Sphacteria gave Athens new confidence, and the honouring of the victorious commander who'd fulfilled an outrageous promise led to some key decisions. First, it's widely accepted that in the autumn of 425, Thudippus, possibly a son-in-law of Cleon, though not all would agree with that, Thudippus proposed the Great Reassessment of Tribute that placed new financial burdens on members of the empire. Incidentally, this was a significant event during the course of the Archidamian War that was left unmentioned by Thucydides, a real reminder that not all events appear in the historical record. Secondly, probably in the same prytany, and therefore within weeks of this reassessment, a decision was made to initiate a project under Kallikrates. This was established to allow the construction of a temple and an altar, and to establish a priestess for the cult of Athena Nike. On the screen are the double-sided 2 decrees relating to this. Our proposal, and I'm going to use we or our during this presentation to talk about the view that's held by Peter Schultz, Mike Lippmann and myself. Our proposal is that this temple was built to celebrate the victory at Sphacteria in a really prominent way. The epigraphic evidence supporting the construction of the temple is provided by this double-sided stele. On each side are separate decrees. On the left side, as you're looking at it, is the decision to build the temple, construct the altar, appoint the priestess. On the reverse, on the right side, was the proposal by Kallias to make the payment of 50 drachmas. You can see that on line 6. 50 drachmas to the priestess as anticipated by the initial decree. So one is anticipating the other. The decree relating to the payment for the priestess is dated to the 6th prytany of 4243. Thus, by the autumn or the winter of 4243, the revised sanctuary would appear to have been functioning and a priestess selected. We'll come back to some of the details from these decrees shortly. Well, what's the current position on the temple of Athena Nike? Well, this isn't the time to review the scholarship on the temple of Athena Nike, but what I'd like to do is just select a few views so that you get a feel of what scholarship at the moment is thinking about this wonderful temple. The widely held position is that the decision to build the temple was taken in the mid to late 430s. Some might even place it in the early 440s, thus making the temple part of the Periclean building programme, and they placed the decree prior to the outbreak of the Archidamian War. Some, like Geoffrey Hurwitz, suggest work on the bastion started by 432, though that the temple was not constructed until 425 or so. John Camp has proposed the start of construction must have been the late 430s. T. Leslie Shear Jr. has claimed that the foundations for the temple were laid probably no later than circa 435, and that by 432 the marble paving slabs of the classical terrace were in place. Indeed, he asserts, we may be certain, note that word, we may be certain that by circa 435 the specifications for the temple of Athena Nike had been determined in exact detail. Robin Osborne and Peter Rhodes, in their review of the epigraphic evidence, placed the decision to build the temple to 438-435 or 450 to 445. And they follow Shear's position, suggesting that the outbreak of the Archidamian War put a halt to the building project that was only actualised by 4243. Moreover, they placed the decision to build the temple before 437, and a gap of at least 12 years between these two explicitly related decrees is certain. In other words, they place a decade or more between the decision to revise the temple and the decree authorising the payment to the newly appointed priestess. Our proposal is that while the building of the Propylaia in the 430s anticipated a rebuilt sanctuary of Athena Nike on a raised level, the decision to build the temple was not taken until 425, and that the project was completed swiftly in order to mark the miraculous victory at Sphacteria. Some of our work is in a response to Harold Mattingly's research on the epigraphy relating to the sanctuary, as well as a response to the revised view that the appearance of the three-barred sigma in the Nike temple decree no longer needs to be used to place the decision in the early 440s. Well, what went before this lovely Ionic temple? Well, the Nike temple decree proposes replacing an earlier temple. This appears to have been the one constructed in the early 440s. The structure was placed on the bastion that had been the location of a much earlier sanctuary dating to the Archaic period. The inscription on your screen is from the Archaic altar, recording the work of Patrocles on a bomos, an altar of Athena Nike. And it's assumed that this archaic temple would have been destroyed during the Persian sack of the Acropolis. The sanctuary, constructed in the early 440s, was built with Aeginetan poros. You can see here on the screen the post-Persian destruction layout of the propylon on the right of the screen, the ramp heading up to the top left, and then the Nike bastion next to it, with a sort of courtyard area between the two. So the temple was built from this imported stone, and it may point to its construction in the period following Athens' domination of Aegina after the island's defeat in 457. Aeginetan stone was also used for the Iakeion in the Agora that celebrated an Aeginetan hero. The construction had been prompted by an oracle from Delphi. I'm afraid this plan doesn't show the Iakeion, or doesn't label it, but if you look towards the bottom of the screen, next to South Stoa 1 is something called the rectangular peribolos. That is almost certainly the Iakeion. So this is the structure that's constructed after the replacement is constructed after the Persian Wars of Aeginetan Poros. So we've got two structures in Athens in the same period of this stone. The sanctuary of Athena Nike contained a rectangular altar, also made of Aeginetan Poros, and in fact the altar itself was extended with mud brick. The terminus post quem for this phase of the sanctuary is provided by the use of a block of Piraeus limestone that appears to be of the same dimensions as those used for the south wall of the Acropolis that was built to mark Cimone's victories at the Eurymedon in the 460s. The block was presumably left unused and was made available for the construction of the renewed temple. It was this temple, built of Aeginetan Poros, that we would argue was standing on the bastion at the outbreak of the Archidamian War. We would also add that work to replace it had not commenced by this point. Well, any assessment of the date of the Ionic temple of Athena Nike proposed by this Nike temple decree needs to take account of the building work that was taking place in its vicinity. And there are two key projects. First, the Propylaia, the monumental gateway to the Acropolis, that started work in 437. The southwest wing of the Propylaia, you can see that sort of the central part of your screen just to the left of the scaffolding. That southwest wing appears to have been designed to provide access to a sanctuary of Athena Nike that would be placed at a raised level at some future point. The construction of the Propylaia blocked the access to the sanctuary of Athena Nike that since at least the early 440s had been through a courtyard adjacent to the earlier propylon that was being replaced with the new gateway complex. A new entrance to the sanctuary of Athena Nike was inserted adjacent to what we know as Pier W. Pier W, as you're looking at this, is to the left of the stairway. You can just see the trace of the pilaster, that's Pier W. And what this did was allow the sanctuary to continue to function on a level lower than the Propylaia. So you can imagine the Propylaia being built up at a much higher level than the bastion of Athena Nike, and this gateway is now formed to provide access to that sanctuary so that the building work doesn't interfere with it. The second project in the vicinity of the bastion relates to the Acropolis wall. And just so to explain this screen, you can see on the right hand side the Acropolis wall immediately behind the bastion. Immediately to the left of it is the courtyard that linked the propylon with the sanctuary of Athena Nike at this much lower level. And then the outline at the top of the screen is the southwest wing of the Propylaia. And then you can see on the left screen, D and F are the two sides of the Nike bastion heading westwards. Well, the architect named in the Nike temple decree for rebuilding the sanctuary of Athena Nike was Kallikrates. And apart from his work on the Parthenon, and the middle wall linking Athens to the Piraeus, he appears in this decree as the architect for the new temple. He also appears in an inscription relating to a time-limited project repairing a stretch of the Acropolis walls, almost certainly this stretch behind the Nike bastion and next to the new Propylaia. Let me just read a bit of the inscription. The fortifications are to be built on the Acropolis so that neither a refugee nor a thief can gain entrance. Kallikrates is to prepare the specifications so as to construct them as well and economically as possible, and the hoplites are to let the contracts so that they may be repaired within 60 days. There are also to be 3 guards, bowmen, drawn from the tribe in Brittany. That's a translation by Shear with some adaptations by me. Although this repair work has been dated to the period immediately prior to the outbreak of war, perhaps in anticipation of it, it seems equally possible that it comes from the period in the early stages of the Archidamian War, when refugees were flooding the city of Athens as they fled from the Spartan invasions of Attica. The word used in the inscription for refugees, drapetes, is also picked up in the title of the play by Cretinos, reminding us of the sensitivities around this group of displaced dwellers in the countryside. So let's turn to the construction of the new sanctuary. The decision to build the new sanctuary, replacing the one made of Aegina and poros, meant that the level of the sanctuary of Athena Nike had to be raised by some 1.8 meters. The bastion on which the temple rested was faced with blocks of Piraeus limestone. The construction of the temple meant that the level of the sanctuary was raised to nearly the height of the southwest wing of the Propylaia. The space between the foundations and the paving stones was filled with marble chips. R. Mark, who studied the creation of the sanctuary of Athena Nike, considered that they were chips from the construction of the temple. Indeed, Mark rejected the suggestion that the chips came from the Propylaia. However, Shear has claimed the chips were derived from the construction of the Propylaia and used them to suggest the foundations of the Temple of Athena Nike had already been laid by the time that the Propylaia building work came to an end in 432. Let me just quote him. By the time construction of the Propylaia was suspended in 432, the marble paving slabs of the classical terrace were in place, sealing beneath them masses of marble building debris from the workshops of the Propylaia. Separately, Shear noted, beneath the paving slabs of the classical terrace were found masses of marble working chips, forming a layer more than twice as thick as the pavement itself. All of this was the mason's waste from the stone yards within the Acropolis, where the marble blocks of the Propylaia were in the process of being dressed. It shows that work on the bastion of Athena Nike began shortly after the start of construction of the Propylaia, and the two projects were closely contemporary. Shear rejected Mark's suggestion that the chips came from work in the sanctuary itself. Mark simply asserts that the marble chip waste came from the Nike temple, not the Propylaia, because he wishes to date the construction of the building to the late 420s on the basis of the style of its sculptural frieze, rather than on the evidence of the stratigraphy of its foundations. There is no conclusive proof about the source of the chips, and workings from the temple would need to be disposed of in a convenient way. Indeed, it could be suggested that Shear simply asserts that the marble chip waste came from the Propylaia and not the Nike temple, because he wishes to date the construction of the building to the 430s. One of the features of the Nike temple decree was that the sanctuary should be doored up as work gets underway. The implication is that the sanctuary had to be closed while the bastion was clad in limestone, the height raised. And this requirement would be best interpreted by the closing of the entrance to the sanctuary adjacent to Pier W. Access to the sanctuary would continue through this entrance, but now via a stepped approach. So you can see the steps on the north side, the top side of this plan. And it's this temple that we would agree with our remark was designed by the architect Kallikrates. So how do we date the Nike temple decree? I've presented up to this point the position that the revised sanctuary was started as a response to the victory at Sphacteria. But we should revisit this Nike temple decree to ascertain when the decision to build the temple was made. There are no internal clues as to the date of the decree. For many decades, the use of the three-barred sigma in the decree, you can see the sigmas very clearly on this slide, was passed in the early 440s. This dating by letter form was challenged by the appearance of the three-barred sigma in the Egesta decree that had traditionally been dated to 4587 or 4543. However, thanks to laser scanning of the Egesta decree, lost letters could be read in the archon's name and the inscription dated to 4187. This then allowed the dates of a number of inscriptions, including this one, to be lowered. The reverse of the Nike temple decree, the slide on the right, relates to the proposal by Piraeus that the priestess of Athena Nike should receive a payment of 50 drachmas. The grammateus is recorded as Neoclides, thus placing the payment decree in the same prytany and the same year as the treaty with Piraeus in the Argolid. And here's a fragment of that decree now in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. This treaty with Piraeus probably took place in the wake of the establishment of the Athenian base on the Methana Peninsula adjacent to the Troitsenia. And this was a part of a field project with the University of Liverpool a few years ago. But this is a shot looking down the isthmus of Methana, Troitsen behind me, the Methana Peninsula you can see just at the behind, and the Athenian fort built or constructed after the victory at Sphacteria here on the isthmus. Mattingly also proposed that a fragmentary inscription with a similar language to the Piraeus decree may in fact be a treaty with Troitsen, a treaty that's known to have been in place by the time of the one-year truce with Sparta in 423. Neoclides also served as grammateus in the fragmentary honorific decree for Sotimos of Heraclea, who's named as Proxenos and benefactor, and this decree may be linked to Sotimos's help with the Athenian squadron under Lamachus when several ships were wrecked near Heraclea following a storm in 424. Thus the associations allow us to be certain about the date when the sanctuary was functioning, a position agreed by most. The first holder of the priestess of Athena Nike is known, Myrinae, daughter of Callimachus. She's named on this grave stele discovered on the western edge of Hymettos that records that she was the first to watch over the temple of Nike. The inscription emphasizes she was chosen by lot from all by good fortune. Fortune, it should be remembered, was a word emphasized in the Athenian victory at Sphacteria. Osborne and Rhodes date this Myrinae stele to 410. Tracy has identified the person who cut the inscription as the same individual who cut the Piraeus accounts dating to 4243. There is a second inscription on a funerary lekithos, also linked to Myrinae, found in the vicinity of Syntagma, and the depiction of her dress suggests she may have served as a priestess. The issue of two possible funerary monuments to the same priestess need not detain us here. The name Myrinae also appears in Lysistrata as the wife of Kynesias, whom she claims has been away as part of the Athenian garrison at Pylos. But of course, Kynesias was very much present in Athens. We noted earlier that there is a commonly held assumption that there's a gap of many years, if not a decade or more, between the two decrees that are cut on either side of the same stele. In other words, the view is that a decision to build the temple was taken in the mid to late 430s, or even the early 440s, while the first payment to the priestess of the cult took place in 4243. Harold Mattingly has drawn attention to the fact that double-sided decrees were normally placed close together in time. He cites a number of examples, including the double-sided decree recording treaties with Egesta and Halicae in Sicily, dating to 4187 and 4165, the decrees relating to Hestiaia on Evia, perhaps from 4243, decrees relating to Colophon, honours for Potamodorus of Orchomenos from around 4243. So thus an exception would have to be made for this double-sided decree relating to the sanctuary of Athena Nike. Should we bring the decree authorising the construction of the temple and the one recording of the appointment of the priestess closer together in time? This proposal that the Nike temple decree was passed perhaps a year or two before 4243 departs from the accepted chronological scheme for the temple and the decrees relating to it. The accepted view is that the Nike temple decree was passed in the 440s. Osborne and Rhodes provide a date for the decree, 438-435 or 450 to 445. Although they accept nothing epigraphic excludes the date in the early 420s. In other words, their preferred solution is that the decree was passed before the start of the Archidamian War, but the actual construction of the temple was not initiated before 425. Another pointer for the decree being dated to the 420s comes from the rider proposed by Hestiaios in the Nike temple decree that grants provision for 3 men from the Baule to work with the architect Kallikrates. I've put the rider, so the addition to the main decree, in the blue box. Mattingly's observed that the same provision, also in a rider, appears in the Kallikrates decree with a proposed date of 4243, although again not all would agree with that date, some placing it in 4465. In the Kallikrates decree, 3 men were to be selected to assist Hierocles. 3 men, chosen by the council from their own number, shall go with Hierocles to carry out the sacrifices required by the oracles about Evia as quickly as possible. The purpose of the riders in both cases seems to have been to expedite the work proposed in the decree. Both the Nike temple decree and the Kallikrates decree, as well as the Great Reassessment, share an unusual rider that starts merely with the name of the proposer and then epē, you can see that on the screen, and then goes into the substance of the rider. Meggs and Lewis noted the normal amendment formula is omitted. Are such features likely to suggest that the Nike temple decree should be dated in the mid-420s in line with the Kallikrates decree? The Kallikrates decree also contains wording in one of the riders for good fortune for the Athenians, And this resonates with the same phrase in the one-year truce with Sparta in 4243. The final rider of the Halhis decree is proposed by Archestratos, who also proposed amendments recorded in the double-sided decree honouring Potamodorus of Orchomenus, probably just after the Athenian defeat at Delium in 4243. Together, these strands of evidence would suggest that the Chalcis decree and with it the Nike temple decree should be placed together in the mid-420s. A final piece of evidence that suggests the sanctuary of Athena Nike was revised in the mid-420s comes from an inscription dating to the 330s and recording the restoration of a statue of Athena Nike from the sanctuary. The text records that it had been derived from booty won during the Archidamian War in 426 and 425. The campaign against the Ambraciots, the capture of Olpae, the insurrection at Kerkyra, the campaign against the Anactorians. And this would appear to be a thank offering in the sanctuary. But it does suggest that a date for activity in the sanctuary about 425 is likely. Where was the decree displayed? William Dinsmore Sr. claimed to have identified a slot for a stele adjacent to the double anter at the northwest corner at the southwest wing of the Propylaia. The picture on the left, and you can see the slot on the top of the block there. He suggested this is where the double-sided decree as well as the double-sided accounts relating to the sanctuary were displayed. And it's a position followed by Leslie Shear Jr. Let me just read his position. The original site of these two stelae might logically be sought in the neighbourhood of the Temple of Athena Nike. Now it happens that near the northeast corner of that temple, beside the stairway descending to the main approach, is a bench backed by a Z-shaped parapet contemporary with the Propylaia and forming a suitable shelf for the exhibition of stelae. Yet it's not clear when these cuttings were made or which stelae were placed in the slots. Leslie Shear Jr. observed that the stele was placed in the socket and it left a shadow against the polished surface of the anter. He suggested that the double-sided decree was displayed here before the marble of the west-facing anter, adjacent to the sanctuary of Athena Nike, and before it was given a final polish. Moreover, he suggested that such a polish to the surface would have occurred before the Propylaia project was brought to a sudden conclusion in 432 as war loomed. Of course, the surface may have been left unpolished in anticipation of the raising of the level of the sanctuary of Athena Nike. Why polish a surface that was adjacent to an expected building site? Could the polishing have been done in 4243 or later, once the Athena Nike project was nearly complete and certainly functioning as a sanctuary? This position may not in fact be the one for the Nike temple decree in any case, as Peter Schultz has noted that the two stelae relating to the sanctuary, while not retaining the lower sections, are not the right proportions for this space. In other words, the sockets do not prove a convincing chronological marker. The foundations for the connecting wall from the southwest wing of the Propylaia to Pier W were polished, and the implication is that they were intended to be seen. In contrast, the west-facing foundations of the southwest wing were left in a rough state. Shear interpreted these features as follows. From this we can conclude that an important change of plan occurred between the construction of the podium for the front colonnade of the southwest wing and the laying of the foundation for its west facade, and that change resulted from the decision to raise and enlarge the Nike bastion. Yet this evidence would suggest that the foundations of the podium below the north side of the southwest wing and the wall leading to Pier W were intended to be seen as part of the access to the sanctuary of Athena Nike at the lower level. It doesn't imply the decree authorizing the new sanctuary had been passed at this point. It merely implies that there was an expectation that the work would be carried out at some future point. Before we turn to the iconography of the Temple of Athena Nike, it's worth considering a small similar Ionic temple that was located by the Ilissos and should be identified with the Temple of Artemis Agraterra. The structure, though now lost, was recorded by Stuart and Revet in the 1750s, and the similarity between the two buildings suggests both were the work of Kallikrates. Pottery from the fill of the terrace finds parallels dating to the 420s, suggesting both temples were contemporary. Fragments from the frieze from this Ilissos temple, now in Berlin, point to a stylistic date in the 420s. Part of the frieze seems to show the sack of Troy. The cult of Artemis Agraterra seems to have come to prominence in the wake of the Battle of Marathon. The Athenians made a vow to the goddess to sacrifice a goat for each Persian slain, but as the Persian dead numbered 6,400, the Athenian assembly agreed to offer 500 goats each year. This sacrifice of goats to commemorate Marathon seemed to be the allusion in Aristophanes' Knights, when the sausage seller declares in a mock competition with Paphlagon, Cleon, first 100 cattle were promised to be sacrificed to the goddess, and the sausage seller increased the amount to 200 and added 1,000 goats to Artemis Agraterra. This one-upmanship was perhaps to emphasize the hollowness of Cleon's piety towards the gods, as he tried to model himself on Pericles. So what was the message of the sanctuary? The architectural sequence and the Nike temple decree point to a date in the mid-420s for the construction of the temple. But how do the architectural sculptures reflect this moment in time? The celebration of the victory at Sphacteria is hinted at by the fittings for the Acroteria for the Temple of Athena Nike. The apex block on the east side, the side you're looking at now, contains cuttings suggesting it supported a gilded bronze Nike that's estimated to have been at least 1.2 to 1.7 meters in height. This seems to suggest that there were 3 Nike placed at the apex at both ends of the temple. The cuttings are reminiscent of the dedication by the Messenians and the Naupactians of a descending Nike created by Paionius of Mende that was placed at the eastern end of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. The Olympia inscription indicates that the sculpture was the result of booty taken from the enemy, clearly the Spartans. And 4 further Nike were placed at the corners of the Temple of Athena Nike, making 10 in all. The temple was decorated with a continuous Ionic frieze with scenes drawn from myth and history. These frieze showed a gathering of the Olympian gods, perhaps centered on the birth of Athena, and the inspiration may well have been from the statue bases created by Phidias. It includes a group of 3 containing Apollo, Artemis, and Leto, perhaps a nod to the cleansing of Delos in 426-5, as well as the introduction to the cave of Apollo on the north slope of the Acropolis. Athena herself is shown holding a shield facing an enthroned Zeus. And it's worth remembering that Paphlagon, that's to say Cleon, in Knights, gives Athena the epithet Pallas Poleimachos, perhaps a title that resonated with the victory of Pylos. On the south side is a scene showing Persians and Greeks in battle, and it's likely that this represents the Battle of Marathon, one of the most celebrated victories by the Athenians, and one that notably lacked the appearance of any Spartan forces. Harrison suggested that the iconography may draw on that found in the Stoa Poikile in the Agora, where of course the shields captured at Sphacteria were displayed by the 2nd century AD. It's been suggested that one of the central figures in the scene represented the Athenian commander Kallikrates. His distinctive pose, legs apart, slashing down, is reminiscent of, and probably a direct allusion to, the statues of Harmodius and Aristogeiton from the replacement Tyrannosides monument in the Agora below. Indeed, Herodotus places an allusion to these upholders of democracy in the mouth of Miltiades before the battle. Remember as well that Cleon claimed descent through his wife from the Tyrannosides, and such a connection was one of the criteria for the award of sitesis. From a historical theme to a mythical one, the north frieze facing the main entrance to the Acropolis, and therefore perhaps the most viewable of the friezes, is more problematic. It seems to show Greeks fighting Greeks, but the insertion of a chariot suggests a heroic setting. In block M, there's a prone, headless body and a chase by warriors of a bearded figure. And the frieze seems to represent the death of Eurystheus by the sons of Theseus, a theme explored in Euripides' Heraclidae, first performed in the early years of the Archidamian War. The allusion to the Peloponnesian Eurystheus pursuing the Heraclidae to Attica would connect the viewers with the recent history of the Spartan invasions of Attica. Moreover, in the play, Eurystheus, who was overtaken at the Scironian cliffs on his flight to the Peloponnese, is brought back to Attica in chains, just as the Spartan prisoners were brought back to Athens from Sphacteria in chains. Indeed, Eurystheus speaks, "I shall lie for all time beneath the earth, a foreign visitor who is kindly to you and protector of the city, but most hostile to the descendants of Heracles' children, when they come here with a great army, betraying the kindness you showed them." Thus both the north and the south friezes hint at the fate of those who invade Attica. The west frieze, with the appearance of battlefield trophy, appears to be a battle between two groups of Greeks who have adopted a contemporary combat using contemporary military equipment. Among the troops are lightly armed figures, some wearing a pilos, holding javelins. Rocks are placed in the background. While some have suggested this was a conflict between Athenians and Thebans, this may be a representation of either the Battle of Sphacteria or possibly the preceding campaign in Ambracia. The bastion was itself crowned on the north, west and south sides with a highly decorated parapet that served to stop animals and users of the sanctuary from falling off the bastion. Although some suggested that it was much later than the temple, it's clear that its construction was contemporary with the temple and very much an integral part of the project. There are at least 4 figures of Athena, you can see one of them here, along with a series of Nike, perhaps as many as 50, on the parapet. These Nike were bringing cattle for sacrifice, and that trophies were included in the scene. Here's one of the, or 2 examples of trophies that appear in this parapet series. And then we have this, the Nike presenting the cattle. Well, it's no coincidence that Thudippus proposed a rider to the Great Reassessment Decree. Let me just read a bit to you. Those cities for which tribute was assessed shall all bring a cow and a panoply to the great Panathenaia. They shall take part in the procession like colonists. And the follow-up decree proposed by Cleinias, perhaps in the following year, also states, if anyone does wrong with regard to the bringing of the cow and the panoply, the accusation against him and the punishment shall be in the same way. Is the provision made for the tribute-paying cities made manifest in the Nike temple parapet frieze? These characteristics are also found in the decree relating to the foundation of Brea in Thrace. Although the location of the colony is unknown, it's likely to have been in the western Halkidiki. It's a colony mentioned in a play by Cretinos, perhaps in 424. In the Brea decree, it's mentioned that the colonists shall bring a cow and a panoply to the great Panathenaia and a phallus to the Dionysia. Thus the settlers from Brea would participate in the procession at Athens along the lines defined in the Great Reassessment. Although most scholars would place the foundation of Brea in the 430s before the outbreak of the Archidamian War, would its foundation be best placed after Sphacteria, when Thrace became the point of tension between Athens and Sparta? The purpose of such a colony would have been to restrict the influence of Perdiccas in the region. A study of the Nike temple bastion has revealed a series of pairs of holes cut for holding brackets. I hope you can see those little dots on that plan by Dinsmore. It's been proposed that these were for mounting 99 of the captured Spartan shields around the bastion. A reference in Knights alludes to them, specifically with their handles attached that would allow them to have been used quite immediately. Again, there may have been allusion to the myth surrounding Eurystheus, as in the Heraclidae, Euryalus removes the displayed armour from the temple to confront Eurystheus. The remaining captured shields would probably have been displayed elsewhere in the city, perhaps in the Agora. One was found in a cistern to the south of the Hephaestion on the edge of the Agora. The inscription proclaimed the Athenians from the Spartans at Pylos. This was presumably displayed on a public building in the Agora, but for some reason was dumped by the time that the cistern was closed in the early 3rd century BC. Pausanias later saw other shields from Pylos on display in the Stoa Poikile, alongside trophies from the capture of Scione in Thrace. And Scione had revolted from Athens in 423, and Cleon had urged for the destruction of the city. The fact that these shields on the Nike bastion could be removed may have meant that they were incorporated into parades. Knights has a number of shield-related jokes, often related to Cleonymus, a member of the group around Cleon, who in Clouds is referred to as a shield slinger. Is the source of the recurring joke the fact that Cleonymus dropped a shield in one of the processions in which the Spartan shields were displayed? So in conclusion, the refurbished sanctuary of Athena Nike was a statement relating to the long-awaited victory over the Spartans. Citizens from the city that had repeatedly invaded Attica were now prisoners in Athens. Panoplies seized at Sphacteria now decorated the exterior of the Nike bastion, as well as public buildings in the Agora. And the benefits of victory included Athens' ability to impose higher tribute on its allies, who in turn were forced to bring their own panoplies and sacrifices to Athens. A refurbished sanctuary of Athena Nike may have been anticipated by the Periclean building programme, but the actual decision to build was not taken until 425. But the victory was short-lived, as cities in Thrace started to rebel against Athens, and Sparta started to exert its presence in the region through the campaign of Brasidas that seized the Athenian foundation at Amphipolis. And it was outside the walls of Amphipolis that both Cleon and Brasidas would meet their deaths, an event that would pave the way for the Peace of Nicaea in 421. The benefits of the victory at Sphacteria would soon be lost, and the association between Cleon and the Temple of Athena Nike soon forgotten. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, David. What a fascinating and masterful lecture for us. I mean, what struck me, I'll hand over to Rebecca in a minute for any questions that Rebecca may have or thoughts as well. But you know, what a range of evidence. I was thinking, David. You know, when you think of, you know, you've woven in here literary, epigraphical, obviously a lot of epigraphical, a number of obviously the archaeological as well, and some of the lovely reconstructions. We're very grateful, as you said, to your colleague who did the reconstruction. I mean, what a statement. I mean, statement was the word I'd written down just before you said it near the end, actually. What a statement it was, you know, when you look at some of these things. But amazing, amazing, really, really good. Any questions from anyone? I saw the comment of Michael Stamatakis, I think, earlier, just in the sense of the stone. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, for that, about the Piraeus stone and the Aegina stone as well. But Rebecca, let me hand over to you. I don't know if you had any thoughts or questions or comments or, yeah.
Well, the Nike temple is one of my most favorite bits of architecture in Athens. And it was just a fabulous way to sit and hear about your new thoughts, about bringing all the different types of evidence together, and so beautifully woven into quite a convincing story. So thank you very much for that. And I was busy keeping notes to impress our visitors next weekend when we go up on top of the Acropolis with my very latest information from your lecture, David. So thank you very much. I'll pass back to Nigel.
Unmute myself. Sorry, there was just a couple of questions actually coming in, David. So one, thank you, Catherine Jessup. Why didn't they build a bigger temple to celebrate the victory? Was it driven by the size of the existing sanctuary?
I mean, the bastion is quite limited space, yes. And there isn't much room to case it in the new limestone facing. So there isn't a lot more space to build. The temple by the Ilissos that I showed you is actually a little bit bigger. And I didn't have time to bring in, there is actually another building inscription, which I have a strong feeling is dated to about 424 or 4243.
Okay.
And I think that's a candidate for it. So I think there may have in fact been two very similar temples, one to Athena Nike, one to Artemis Agrateira. I think that the question, you know, could it be bigger? Not in that space. It would have to be somewhere else. Yeah. But it dominates. It dominates the ramp up to the Propylaia. It finishes a rather untidy bit of the entrance or the approach to the Athenian Acropolis, and it's stunning. It outshines everything else.
Yeah.
I think we could even see, you know, does the parapet frieze finish the Parthenon frieze? You know, is it an extension of that? So
that's a thought.
It's
quite a sophisticated structure.
I actually really like the way you brought in the Artemis sanctuary there, and as you were talking about it, I pass it quite regularly, and also it's across the road from the Ilissos Basilica, which is such a fabulous too. But I wondered about the orientation between that and the Nike temple, and whether there's any kind of intervisibility between the two, and if you would have gotten a sense of the similarity in the structures from one to the other.
I'm going to confess I've forgotten. I have looked at the orientation. I'd have to come back to you. on that.
I'll try and nip down in a couple of days and see if I can see anything interesting.
But actually, another really interesting thing about the Temple of Artemis Agraterra is that there is a decree relating to that. You know, please don't wash your hides derived from sacrifices, kathamata, in the river because it's polluting the river.
Yeah.
And of course, they're being used for tanning. And who was the great tanner? Cleon and his father. So I have a suspicion that something else is going on there as well. So there's Cleon is there. There's lots more that could be said about Artemis Agraterra.
Very interesting. David and Rebecca, just a couple of quick questions. Nick Service, Nicholas, thank you very much. Apart from saying fascinating and thank you, Nick said, how frequent was it to decorate temples with captured shields and weapons as opposed to building a trophy on the site of the battle won?
By this point, I think it's quite unusual. Somebody else might come back on that. I mean, trophies, yeah, we do see them in all sorts of places. And reading various texts, you keep noticing a trophy is set up. Of course, famously at Sphacteria, Brasidas, the Spartan commander, loses his shield, is knocked out, and his shield is built into the Athenian victory monument. So there's this light bit of play that Thucydides has there. But I think they're not common. Sicily, I think, has them. I think I noticed Jonathan Prague was in the list of people, so Jonathan might.
So in terms of, I think Nick was asking about temples that have shields on them, and quite a few, like at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, Zeus at Olympia, later on.
Perhaps just one, not a sort of whole array.
Yeah. I think later they become a bit more popular as well.
Yeah, I mean the Parthenon, you can see the line of holes across them.
Yeah, because it was fascinating actually seeing that lovely drawing, the reconstruction, as you say, of how they are side by side, David, as well, and the impact it makes as well. Just one other question that's come in from Aileen Tannehill. What was the purpose of the Athenian fortress on Methana?
Oh. Well, it's part of, I think, a policy of the Athenians building a series of naval bases. So there's one in the off Euboea, for example, that famously gets wiped out by a tsunami. But it dominates the Argolid and makes sure that Troitzon and Haliaeus toe the line and are friends of Athens. So there's no question that this part of the Peloponnese can rise up. I mean, it's a fairly simply made fort, but it's oval shaped. If you want to see it, it's in the monograph for the Methana survey.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And actually, I should say, the base becomes a Ptolemaic base, and then becomes a base against Athens. So it's quite an interesting location. It's very strategic.
Very well chosen location, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Very careful. Well, they're all the questions. I mean, there's lots and lots of comments in the chat just saying thank you for an exceptional lecture. Thank you. So I think I'm conscious of time, everyone, and I think it just probably remains for me to say, David, that was such a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for putting that together for us and for enlightening us. And I learned so much, like you, Rebecca. I've got pages of notes here now, all about the topic, which it was such a pleasure. And I say the richness of the three-dimensional way you used evidence, I thought was really was inspiring. Actually, really nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A real pleasure. Flora, is there anything else I need to remember to say here at the end? Apart from, again, thank you to everyone, and to Flora for all her help, and Rebecca for being here.
Thank you.
And for everyone for joining as well, of course,
Yeah,
as well. Glad you've enjoyed it, as we can see. Flora, is there anything else to add before we close?
No, just to remind about our next event.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. So we've got the lecture series, and as I say, for those who happen to be in London on the 21st of October, there is the opportunity to come and have a lecture, but also have some Greek wine as well if you happen to be in town. So that would be lovely. But lovely to see some of you there. There aren't many seats left, I think, so feel free to get in quick for that. But David, thank you very much indeed. Real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you also for thank you, David, as well, and all of you.
Yes. Yeah, and thank you, Flora and Rebecca, and thank you all for dialing in. And feel free to dial out now, and we'll close down the webinar. But thank you very much indeed, everyone. Take care and best wishes.
Bye.
Bye now. Bye bye. Take care.